Okay, everybody, welcome to yet another NovaScribes. This is Retooling You, and today we are going over refiners, specifically criteria-based refiners. Let me go ahead and share my screen so it's a little bit easier for you all to see. And when I'm talking about refiners, just as a quick recap, there are those moves that we do to bring ideas into the room. We call those openers. Openers are things like brainstorming, brainwriting, mind mapping, think, write, share, 1, 2, 4, all. Those generate ideas. There are closing moves. Closing moves are things that you do when you've made a decision. So, for example, coming up with an action list, plotting stuff out on a calendar, doing a Gantt chart, using some Grove templates, like, for example, the graphic game plan or the graphic roadmap. I would consider those all planning tools and closers. And then there are refiners. So refiners happen in the space between diverging on ideas and converging together to make a decision. Earlier today, we talked a little bit about preference-based refiners, which is to say voting. All in favor, say aye. That's based on individual's preference. Today, right now, we're going to talk about criteria-based decision-making refiners. Okay, and there's really two that I want to make sure that we cover, and then a bunch that we might get to, but there's two big ones. Okay, so let's jump into it. I should say that the reason to do one of these things is when it's worth it. The juice has to be worth the squeeze. Okay, so you reserve this for when you need to make the decision-making criteria explicit. It's not enough just to say, okay, what's your preference? What do you prefer? This is really like, we got to know why, because we're going to have to defend this, or we're going to have to recreate this decision at some point. All right, so let's start with well, I'll say it's the lightest one. It still is a heavy lift, so you're going to want to reserve this for important stuff. We're going to do a 2x2, okay? And you've all seen 2x2s before. McKinsey says you can put anything into a 2x2. I'll show you the most popular one, and then we'll do some variations, okay? So the one from the Luma Institute goes like this. On the one hand, we chart the impact of this decision, of this idea. On the x-axis, we chart out difficulty, okay? So impact versus difficulty. And before you get into it, you want to define that a little bit, not too much, but just a light touch on this. So what do we mean when we say difficulty? We might say, how much is this going to cost us? I'm sorry. Let's start with difficulty. How much is this going to cost us, right? How much time is it going to take? How many people, human resources do we need to dedicate to do this thing? Is it going to be easy? Or is it going to be hard? Okay, now pay real close attention to where I put easy and hard on this one, right? That might be a little bit non sequitur with what you're used to. But in the Luma impact difficulty matrix, easy goes on the outside and hard goes on the inside. When we say impact, it's going to be either high impact or low impact. That one's pretty straightforward. But we need to define it a little bit. This could be, what's our return on investment? Or how many people is this going to touch? Or to what extent does this help us achieve our mission or our vision or our values or whatever, our purpose for being, right? So the goal here, by the way, don't spend a whole lot of time with your groups defining these criteria. Just lightly get it up there. Do not spend a whole lot of time on this one. It is really easy to fall into the criteria trap. And remember, hold on a second. This is important enough that I need to write it down. With any of these things, chances are Yagni holds true. You ain't gonna need it, okay? It is really easy to say, well, let's come up with this really exotic decision model. The idea is to keep it light and to iterate on it based on the ideas that you have. Remember Yagni, you ain't gonna need it. So we get it up there lightly. Now, remember, at this point, we would have already done some brainstorming. We've already got some ideas on sticky notes. One idea per sticky. And the way that Luma teaches this, and I really like it, is to do it this way, where you say, okay, let's get one out there. Let's say we're deciding where we're going to go eat lunch, okay? Shoba wants to go to Taco Bell. Okay, we'll put Taco Bell on there. Great. Taco Bell goes right there. There's Taco Bell. Who's got another idea? Oh, okay, Karen. Karen wants to go to Sweet Green. Is Sweet Green more or less difficult to get to? Well, it's harder, so we'll put Sweet Green over here. Okay, great. Who's got another idea? Well, let's go. Let's go to one of the. Jose Andres just opened up a new place downtown. Let's go there. All right. Oh, well, we got to go all the way downtown. Jose Andres, that's going to be even more difficult. What if we just had Mary Jo Neal cook for us? Well, that'd be really easy for the rest of us. So we'll put Mary Jo Neal over here. Okay. It might be hard to Mary Jo Neal, but for the rest of us, we'd appreciate it. So the way that they do it is they actually plot all of the ideas against one axis first, okay, relative to each other. And the idea here is, again, is to represent these things relative to each other to the extent that you can resist the tendency that people will have to put sticky notes on top of each other. Say, yeah, I know they're kind of close to each other, but really, which one's tougher? Which one's easier? Okay. Then, and only then, after you've got all the ideas represented along one axis, you repeat the same thing going vertical. And again, I really, really like this way of doing it rather than hitting both axes at once. Although you can certainly do that, I find this to be a much more streamlined, frictionless conversation than to try to do both axes at the same time. But after you get this, you say, okay, well, let's start with Taco Bell. What's the impact of Taco Bell? And then say, well, it's kind of low impact, not super great. We'll move that one up here. And so you physically move these sticky notes up and down. And I'm just going to draw where they go. Well, Jose Andres, that'd be really cool. It'd be high impact. We'll go it here, but it's going to be really hard to do. Okay. So there goes Jose Andres. Sweet Green, kind of lower impact, but certainly higher than Taco Bell. Okay. Mary Jo, I'd really like to see what Mary Jo can cook for us. So we'll put Mary Jo on this one. And then, likewise. So you walk through these one at a time, moving them vertically. Okay. Now, of course, the implication here is that you pick the stuff that is very easy to do and very high impact. That's the implication. What I would say is that there's a challenge with that. But before I get into the challenge, let me just say this. If anybody has any comments, questions, feel free to just go off mute. I will see it, and I'll see if I can resolve your question, concern, comment, anything that you'd like to add to this. Nope, if not, okay. There is a downside to this one, and that is that it only has two criteria. This is best explained with a story. I was once doing this for a federal agency, and we did exactly this. We were doing a program build, all right, which is to say, what are we going to do to spend our money over the next 5 years? And there was a critical mass of stuff that was showing up right here in the easy and high impact. But the facial expressions in the room were like this. I call that frinkly. It was like frowning and wrinkly at the same time. I was like, hey folks, I'm noticing that there seems to be some frinkly faces going around this particular conversation. I'll tell you what, let's do a dot vote. And I passed out some dots. I demonstrated dot voting just a second ago. I passed out some dots and I said, here's what I'd like you to do. Take the dots and against all of these options that we have up on the board, there were a bunch of them, go ahead and vote for the ones that you think are most likely to occur, okay? And what do you think happened? All of the dots went down here into the really low impact, high difficulty options. And I said, this is really interesting. Now, folks, I'm not the brightest crown in the box, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but answer me this. Why would we want to do the things that are low impact and very difficult? And they said, well, Brian, we're a federal agency. It is law that we do these things. We have to do these things. We're mandated by Congress to do these things. Nobody wants to do these things. They're really hard. It's going to be difficult. We'd much rather be up here, but by law, we've got to do these things. I was like, okay, got it. Very good. Okay. So the takeaway from this one is be careful of it, because only having two criteria may take you down the garden path to a place that you don't necessarily want to be. I think it's a good idea to check for commitment, doing something like a dot vote, right, after you're done with a 2x2 like this. Okay. This is the baseline. This is like the foundational way of doing an impact difficulty matrix. I'll show you a couple of other variations. What questions do you have about this one before we move on? Yeah, Karen, what do you got?
I was just thinking about the idea of the assessment. Like, let's say you've done it all, you've got it all broken up, and it looks all pretty. The idea you did the dot vote, but also that asking question like, how do you feel? Thumbs up, thumbs middle, thumbs
Yes.
down.
Yeah.
Is that another kind of like just getting an assessment of did we land what on something that truly feels right to the people?
Right. So to your point, yes, that's a check for commitment. Okay. The reason I'm using that word check for commitment, Kaner talks about that. The Grove talks about a check for commitment. Even after you've done a criteria-based refiner, even after you've done it, it's a good idea to say, are we on board with this? I think it's a good idea going all the way back to closers. Like even after we have our calendar and our Gantt chart and our game plan and our whatever, our action steps, even just to do, hey, thumbs up, are we agreed? So checking for commitment as you go, I think is a really good thing to do. Okay. Um, let's see what else we've got. All right, so let's do a couple of variations on the impact difficulty matrix. Okay. So one way that you could draw it, it's almost the same thing. I still like impact here. Whoops, that was cool. Oh, neat. It's like turning my stuff into things. I wonder if I can turn that off. Ink to text. Hopefully it doesn't do that. Oh, I see what's happening. All right. All right. All right. Very clever. So it thinks it's smarter than me. It probably is. So let's get rid of that. Okay. Attitude of wonder. All right. So another way you can do it is to say impact. And then rather than do difficulties, to say ease of implementation. Okay. Because I don't know, sometimes with some people, some participants, it kind of breaks their brain to have easy out here and hard down here. And they end up arguing with you. But then in that case, like the easy answers are like in the wrong quadrant. Like you kind of want the stuff you're going to do to wind up here. Okay. So ease of implementation, high, very easy, low, high, low. Okay. It's a small nuance, but I kind of like that one. Another thing that you can do with these things is I showed you these like striations that go at a diagonal. Another way that you can do it is to introduce quadrants to this thing to make it a little bit easier to navigate through. Okay. You can even go deeper than that. Let's see if I can delete this many. You can even go deeper than that and turn it into a 9 box if you want to. But I would reserve that for like if you've got a ton of different options that's out there. Okay. All right. So that was kind of a quick hit. There's other design decisions that you can make with this. Like, for example, like, is there a reason that we might want to do some cells smaller than another? Does that relate to some sort of criteria that we've got? But, for all intents and purposes, I would keep this one as simple as possible. 2 criteria. This one can only handle 2. Okay. Let's do a multi-criteria. Okay. And there's a couple of these, but I'll show you the one that I keep coming back to again and again. And so this one, if the previous one, you could call this a 2x2 or a matrix, also called often a high-low. Okay. All the same thing. This one has got also, like everything else, it's got a couple of different names to it. Sometimes you see this referred to as a decision funnel or decision filters or even a decision model. Sometimes you hear this referred to as decision modeling. And again, like I said last time, if you call it decision modeling, you get to charge more for it. It's exactly the same thing. But here's how it goes. We start by just drawing some diamonds up on the on the board, and I'm doing the filters version of this. Okay. Let's just do 3. Okay. And I'll pick as my criteria, is this thing valuable? Okay. And then I'll do, okay, for this one, is it rare? And then for this last one, I'll say, is this idea organizationally supported? And I'm just picking like random criteria. Those of you that have done a little bit of, MBA work, you might recognize VRIO, valuable, rare, inimitable, organizationally supported in here. I'm just picking these 3, minus the 50-cent, inimitable word, which nobody knows what that means. I'm going to lightly define this with my group. So I'm going to say, do we have customers for this? Do we have customers? And somebody says, wait a minute, yeah, we've got customers, but they won't pay for it. It's like, okay, fine. Do we have paying customers? But that's as deep as I want to get. I really want to get like a binary yes, no answer. This is going to be quantitative across the board. Is it rare? In other words, does it exist in the marketplace already? Can you go down the street and get it at Walmart? If you can, it's not rare. Is it organizationally supported? Do we have the people that can do this? Or is our reward system tooled for this? Can we measure it? Do we have the metrics to be able to support this thing? Can we handle this? Is this in alignment with our culture? Is this in alignment with our values? Is this in alignment with our mission? All of that good stuff. Is this the right organization to do it? McDonald's might be really good at what they do, but they might also not be great at, I don't know, launching somebody to the moon. Who knows? Whatever. It's got to be organizationally supported for this thing. Okay. You do a light definition of these criteria, whatever it is. Then you get your ideas and you put them over here on the left side. So there's our sticky notes. And you say, okay, our objective here is to create a decision model, is to create decision filters that let the good stuff pass through and catch the bad stuff. And the best way to think of this is like HEPA filters on a vacuum. If the micron size of the HEPA filter is too big, it's going to let a bunch of dirt go through, and we don't want that. If, on the other hand, it's too tight, it's not going to let anything through, and we don't want that either. So we're going to do this iteratively, one at a time, where we would take this first idea. We're going to implement AI for this thing. AI, okay, do we have paying customers? Would customers pay for that? If the answer is yes, then we physically move the sticky note to the next one. We say, well, is somebody else providing the service that we provide using AI right now? If the answer is no, then it goes on to the next one. Is this thing organizationally supported? Well, we could certainly afford to buy AI, but if we're hoping to do what we want with AI, we need to get our workforce on board first. We've got a lot of people who are suspicious of AI. They think it's going to take their jobs. So AI is going to stop right here, and it gets stuck in the filter. Okay? Now notice along the way, I was refining the criteria as we went. Is the workforce on board? That's another question to grab. Okay? Does it exist? Is anyone else doing this? Okay? And as the group is discussing this, you're going to continue to flesh out exactly what these details are on these filters. So they're going to get more and more refined. Let's say we're going to, introduce an app. We don't have an app on the App Store for what we do. Is it valuable? Would people pay for it? Well, probably not. Most apps are free. So by this criteria, we could stop right there, and it goes no further. Now, it still might be a good idea. Maybe we change what we mean when we say valuable. Would this bring in more customers? Okay. So we adjust the micron size based on what's there. Okay. The more Ideas you have, the better, because you refine the criteria. And let me just say, if you're going to do this in a group context, it is a grind. So the more criteria you've got, the longer it takes. I really like to do that. First of all, I teach it, and then I get out of the way and let my participants get into small groups and get into groups of like 8 to 10 so that they can work on this together. I would not do this one as a large group, 40 people in the room. You're going to lose folks. There's just no way to get everybody's ideas in. So teach it, give them some examples, and then get out of the way and let them come up with maybe some competing models that you can mash together at the end, because otherwise it's a grind, right? And you're going to lose people. Now, the result of this thing is that you're going to have a bunch of ideas over here that it's like, okay, we can do these things, okay? We could also do some of the things that got stuck in the filters. And depending on the order of the filters, which is to say the sequence with which you place these, you may have just created a 1 to n list going backwards, where these things at the very beginning we're definitely not going to do. These things at the end, we may actually do it. So the sequence of these things matters as well. The first filters should be the price of entry questions. These are the things that just will weed something out at the very beginning, okay? If it doesn't meet this criteria, we're not going to do it. Later on, it depends. These might be the more like nice to have criteria that's there. So the cool thing about filters is that unlike matrices, you can have multiple criteria going on simultaneously. I would keep it tight. I'd keep it to between 5 and 7 different criteria. More than that, it just gets to be too much of a grind. All right. This one's kind of a heavy one. What questions do you have about this one? Karen, what do you got?
Would you have the group decide the order of the filters, or you decide
Absolutely.
that? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have the group decide everything. You're just basically a hired pen, that draws this stuff as you go. Okay.
Do you have to teach it to them first before they would choose? Like, would you
Uh-oh,
teach
I think I just lost my internet. Hey, hey,
Yeah.
I need you to do me a favor. Get everybody off the internet right now.
He'll be right back.
Am I back?
You are back.
Okay. Do me a favor. Stop streaming Netflix. Okay. Sorry about that. Ask that question again, Karen.
do you teach it first and then have them choose their filters?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
And do a light touch. My favorite decision is to say where should we go eat? And it's amazing. Sure, we can tell you this. It's amazing how people get like quickly emotionally invested, even as a decision as like hypothetical as that one. So yeah, teach it, get out of the way, let them do the hard work. Okay. Cool. Anything else about this one?
A
Karen,
question
other
about
Karen.
level of idea.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with what you put through. So let me just give you an example from a nonprofit.
Yep.
We could put it through the thing, should we have a legislation program? That's going to go through. Should we have a state legislation program? We'll also go through. But then you get into examples about specific states or specific issues, and it's like, hold on, that should not go through. That would get picked up by a filter somewhere. But if you take it to that level of detail, which
Yep.
is basically kind of an idea within a program, if you take that across a decent sized organization, they're just proliferating, they're just proliferating. So
Yeah,
I'm
so it's a
really
question of
struggling.
scale, right? Mhm.
Yeah, and the issue is what'll happen is we'll get a high level approval. I'm sure we can get the board to approve like the high level stuff, but then where's the piece to rationalize? And maybe that's an issue of it's 2 levels of process. Maybe it's the high level stuff at the board. Maybe the staff does it at
Yeah.
the idea level.
Yeah.
This is what I'm really struggling with.
No, that's a really, really great point, because what the other benefit that you get out of this, and I'll answer your question in a second, but the other benefit that you get out of this is replicable decision making, right? So you could have a board create one of these things, hand it over to their executive directors, hand it over to their supervisors, say, use this to make your decisions. That's one way to do it. The other way that you could do it, which is really cool, is you could have cascaded governance this way, right? So there may be decision models, there may be filters at, for example, the national level, the regional level, and then the state level. Because yes, we may want to do programs at the national level. That doesn't necessarily mean we want to do it in Ohio. Nothing against Ohio. I just picked a state. That was totally random, right? But there may be, okay, well, the Ohio team has decided that for us, given our, localization, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us, okay? So that's one way to think about it. But Karen, if we were going to all do this in a room together, the key question to ask in your case would be, well, what is the criteria that we're using? So the question I would ask you
Yeah.
is the legislation, if the legislation program passes and the state legislation program passes, what does it pass? What criteria is it actually passing?
Yeah, so we'd have a potential impact, we'd have
Impact?
fundability, scope. Yeah, sorry, I'm going really fast because I actually have set up a matrix already, but this is better. Impact, fundability.
Okay, so that's like feasibility, right? Are we going to get the funds
Uh,
for it?
yeah,
Fundability?
yeah, I suppose that's a piece of it. Um, there's probably stuff about
Let's stick with those
integration.
two for
Yeah,
right
let's stick
now.
with those two.
Okay,
Fine, fine, that's
let's
good.
stick with those
That's
two.
good.
All right, so and this would be, and this is really cool, Karen, because I love that you said this. Now we have to be clear about what we mean by impact and scope,
Yes, yes.
right? So what would set like Ohio apart from Virginia in this case? In a quantifiable measure, what would be the metric that we would say yes to Virginia, no to Ohio?
Number of animals impacted.
Boom. All right, so number of animals. And I need those numbers. So give me just some raw numbers to play with. What would they be?
No, I'll just make up. I don't have any real numbers.
Go for it, yeah.
10,000.
10,000. So if it was 10,000, it's a yes. We're going to do it. If it's 5,000, are we going to do it?
Good question.
Now notice I'm teasing this out from Karen. This is
Yeah.
exactly how you do this in the room, right? So if it's a 5, do we do it? Now here's the way we figure this out, is that we push some of these ideas through. And again, if they all go through, probably not.
Probably not
If
working.
none of them go through, probably not. If a couple of them go through, we may have the right number. So you do actually put some quantifiable measures on this thing. So again, these are closed-ended questions. Does this impact more than 5,000 animals? Yes, no, right? Or does this impact between 1,000 and 10,000, whatever the number is? Fundability, can we raise more than $10,000 for this objective, whatever it is? But you put some numbers on this thing. And it can be a binary, a yes-no question, or it could be a range on this thing, right?
Yeah.
Karen, how well does that answer your, go ahead.
Yeah, this is terrific. What I like this, you've helped me think about the levels, and this is a simpler way to present it. I have a scoring matrix set up. It will not surprise you. And there's all the columns and there's all the categories.
Yeah.
I got this, but it's too complicated.
It's a grind, man. Yeah, doing that like with a large group, it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, even to just single staff to say, sit down and do your areas. So this really gives me something to think about. And I love this idea about taking in some hypotheticals to the board and letting them kind of sign off on criteria and some examples and then sending it back to staff to work with it. It's terrific.
I'm glad you like it. Here's this is like a quick reference that I did of here's what it looks like in the room. It's a drawing. It's not exactly what it looks like in the room, but that's the idea of what we're getting at. Sorry, let me get this out of the way. I don't know if I've got, I do actually, this is Karen, I think you and I actually worked for this person. Keep it quiet if you recognize her. But they were doing a decision model. I don't think that you were with me on this one, but it was one of our like original clients way back like 10 years ago. That's what it looks like when you're doing it in the room. You draw the diamonds, you push it through. Okay. All right, cool. Those were the two big ones that I wanted to show you. I've got a bunch of little ones though. Okay. The reason I like these two is because now we're getting into multi-factor criteria. Okay. Let me give you a few more. So I would be remiss if I didn't include force field analysis. Okay. Some of you are like, oh yeah, force field analysis. Force field analysis, if you haven't heard of it, it was actually invented. Kurt Lewin invented this, which is kind of neat. If you've ever had any connection with the Lewin Center, that's awesome. If you haven't, you should really check out the work of Kurt Lewin. He's pretty amazing. And the way that it works is that you could think of it as a weighted pro and con scale. Okay. So on the one hand, you have your driving forces. These are things that are pushing you to do a thing. And then you have your restraining forces. These are the things that are pushing you away from doing a thing. So this is why we might do it, why we might not do a thing. And then based on the degree of this, you draw some kind of line graphs. So for this one particular factor, there's a lot of restraining forces and just some driving forces. So for example, let's say that we were deciding where are we going to go have lunch? Favorite example to play with, right? Something we can all relate to. Location might be one of those things. If we were going to go to that Jose Andres place, right? It's really, really nice. DC is, a nice area, but on the other hand, we got to travel. We're going to have to get on the metro. We're going to have to park. Location's not great on that one. But what about like the customer experience? If we went to the new Jose Andres place, well, that'd be really great. It'd be fancy. In my line of work, or in my world, if you've got linen napkins, it's automatically fancy, right? Like that's it. That's my whole criteria right there. It's got linen napkins. It's a fancy place. So yeah, we would want to do it that way. But on the other hand, maybe Hermika, who's super fancy, like she couldn't get her Dom Perignon there, so that might be a restraining for less so, right? But for the rest of us, driving forces. Anyway, the point is that you do kind of these like weighted line graphs. And then it's almost like you imagine that there's a balance point, a pivot point here, okay? And if this thing is tipping too far towards one side or the other, well, that kind of tells you maybe this is not such a good idea. Now, this was a quick and fast version of force field analysis. You can look up much more complicated, instructions on how to do this. Functionally in the room, when you're doing this with a group, when you're facilitating, I think that this is the way to do it. You do it fast, you do it light, you get it out there as quickly as possible. By the way, it's worth pointing out that this pivot point in the center, this stem, for lack of a better word, this is your plan. This is your desired future, right? This is your end state. This is what you're trying to achieve. Okay. All right, that was a quick and dirty on force field analysis. Chris, did you have something?
Did, can you make yourself smaller so we can see it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was sharing my screen. Have I not been doing that? I have.
You have been, but you're not now.
Huff. Okay. How about now?
No.
No. Okay. I thought I was sharing my screen. My bad.
I'm
Yeah,
seeing I'm seeing a screen shared.
As am I.
So I can see you now, but what I was just saying was making yourself smaller, like you just did.
Thank you. Got it. Okay. Force field analysis. That's one. Kurt Lewin. Let me give you another one. I'm going to do some quick, small ones. Like I said, I really wanted to do decision modeling and a matrix. Those are the ones that I use all the time. These are ones that I use less often, but I think they're still valuable. This one's called a horse blanket. Anybody ever seen a horse blanket before? Christine? Oh yeah, a couple did. Amanda did. All right. So horse blanket chart. That's, it's horse blanket chart is the name of the thing. So you draw a big grid. Okay. And along the one hand, you write your options. So we could go to Taco Bell, we could go to the Jose Andres place, we could go to Burger King, we could have Mary Jo Neal cook for us. Those are our options. Then we've got our criteria. Is it cheap? Is it fast? Is it yummy? You come up with your criteria along the way. Does it provide vegan, gluten-free dietary restrictions? Does it do all that stuff, right? And then you would go through this and you would rate it on a scale of 0 to 5, 1 by 1. Okay. And that is the baseline way of doing these things. And presumably you'd pick the one that ranks highest. That's the baseline way of doing it. Now there's some, yeah, Mary Jo, hey, congratulations, you're cooking for us. I may have kind of put my fingers on the scale of that particular outcome. That's the baseline. There are ways that you can game this a little bit, okay? And so it may be that one criteria is more important than another. And if you agree to that, then you can change the scale on it. Maybe instead of it going from 0 to 5, it goes from 5 to 10. And so automatically it gets more points either way, depending on how it goes. That's one way you can do it. Let me just say, the horse blanket chart is another one of those grinds, right, to do in the room. I don't love doing this one. You know, certainly not in the plenary, maybe in small groups. More likely what I like to do is I have a very small team who really cares about this stuff, to do this and then present it to the large group, okay? To get their feedback. Do you like this? Do you not like this? Okay. And by the way, these are all, as I said, refining moves. The refiners are going to have a lot of fun. The people that prefer refining, your openers and your closers are going to be wanting to like physically pull their own heads off with these things because it's such a grind. So be gentle to the folks that are in the room. So you got a horse blanket chart. And by the way, if you were with me an hour ago, this might be the opportunity to do some Harvey balls. Okay, and I'll save it for the video. Go check it out. All right, let's do a couple more. And by the way, feel free to stop me or just go on off mute, and I'll see it and then I'll call on you. Let's do a couple of other kind of not exactly decision-making stuff, but I'll give you some other criteria that you can use, some other moves to like just further refine what we've got. So there's a whole string of things that you could roughly falls into the category called how might, whoops, hopefully you weren't writing, how might this fail? Okay, how might this fail? So from red teaming, we have the method of what's called a pre-mortem analysis. Sometimes you hear what's called a post-mortem. It's kind of a dark way of thinking of it, but the idea with a pre-mortem analysis, you say, okay, the idea has failed. What caused it? And you do some root cause analysis, maybe like a fishbone or an Ishikawa. I'll describe what those are in a minute. But you do anything to like, how did it fail? Why did it fail? And how do we mitigate that cause of failure? So that's a pre-mortem. Triz is another one. Does almost exactly the same thing, right? Triz comes from liberating structures. Pre-mortem analysis comes from red teaming in the Army Red Team Handbook. You can check both of those out. I'll tell you, they're out there. Sometimes I have clients that specifically request them. Personally, I don't dig on them a whole lot because I tend to be more of a strengths-based facilitator. I tend to be more, somebody that focuses on like positive psychology. How might this work? So I like to use methods like appreciative inquiry, positive disruption. And these things are like, all right, let's see if we can blow it up and then fix it again. It's just, I think it can do more harm than good when it comes to actually like people adopting change. And I think you may be priming the wrong behaviors, but I put them out there just to say they're available to you. Okay. Now, another one that you can do, Karen, I'm sorry, you had a question. Nope. Okay. Dangling on mute. Okay. Gotcha. Let's do another one then. One that's a little bit more positive. This is another Luma one. So I call it commercial metaphors. That's probably too highfalutin. I think you can also see this one as called alternative worlds. It's the same thing. Commercial metaphors, alternative worlds. You see both of these referred to. That's pretty simple. How would blank do blank? Okay. And so you can pick your favorite companies if you want. I like, here's just a few. I like to say, how might Starbucks do this? If Starbucks was going to do AI, what would it look like, right? How would Amazon do it? I'll just list kind of my favorites for this, and you can write them down if you want. How might Apple do this? How might Netflix do this? Okay. How might the CIA do this? How might GE do this? How might Star Trek do this? Nobody said these have to be real companies, right? How might Disney do this? How would the Smithsonian do this? How would Zappos do it? Okay, I got to tell you, I really, really want to do this next one. I've never been able to convince a client to let me. How might Mad Max do this? One of these days, I really want to do this. Hermike, I'll come and work for you one of these days. You let me do Mad Max. How might FedEx do this? Okay, you can come up with your own. I'll just quickly list mine, okay? Toyota, Airbnb, McDonald's, Amtrak, Uber, Costco, Oprah, Pixar, Google, Macy's, KOA, you know, those camping places, Trader Joe's, Princess Cruises, Wikipedia, Redbox, Harley Davidson, and my second favorite that I also have never been able to use, Darth Vader. Okay. So how might you do this? So again, commercial metaphors or alternative worlds if you're considering something. Let's do another one. By the way, if you got to weigh in, just go off mute. I'll see it. I'll call on you. This one's called dialogue mapping. And I really like dialogue mapping as a way of doing an analysis of alternatives. This is a really, really good thing to pair with something like a premortem analysis or a TRIZ. But here's how it goes. You start with a question, okay? For example, how might this fail, right? You can start with pretty much any question. And you have, oh, and by the way, credit where credit is due. Dialogue mapping, this came from Jeff Conklin, Conklin, Jeff Conklin. You start with a question. How might this fail, as an example? And then you come up with a couple of ideas. Well, it failed because nobody bought it. It failed because we don't have the processing power. It failed because our organization rejected it, okay? Or those are our ideas. Actually, I did this a little bit wrong, excuse me. We come up with a question, how might we do this thing? An idea is, here's an option for us. We could do this by using AI. We could do this by moving to the cloud. We could do this by outsourcing to Hermike, whatever it is, okay? But these are different options, excuse me. Not explanations, but these are options. These are ideas, okay? So you go from questions to ideas, and then for each one of these things, you say, all right, what are the pros and cons of this? So if we're doing this by AI, it's going to be cheap. It will be more efficient. It'll be faster. The cons are the workforce might reject it. Okay. And then following each one of these, and there may be several pros and cons that go with this thing, you to ask more questions. Well, how do we get the workforce to not reject AI? And then we come up with some more ideas. Well, we could do some training. We could get everybody a license to practice it. We could come up with an AI mascot, you know, to make it friendlier. And then against each one of those ideas, you can see where this is going. You do pros and cons, okay? So again, that's called dialogue mapping. This is another one where I would set it up and then get out of the way. I would teach it to folks. I would not facilitate this one myself. I'd put them into small groups to do this. This one is light enough that a small group, 6, 8 people can do this one on their own. I always have them practice it first. I love to give them the initial question, what should Frodo have done with the ring? Okay. And they take that and they run with it. If you know what that is, you're amazing. If not, we can no longer be friends. All right, let's just do a couple more. Dialogue mapping we've got. Let's get rid of Yagni. All right, I'm going to give you some, what you might consider to be schemas, okay? So what do I mean by that? Let me drop in an example of a way that you can do, oh, like there's Renata. Let's do an example of different lenses that you can use. Let's try this one. This might not work. Hang on. It did not work. Hang on. We'll fix it. Format background, and then we make it white. Cool. All right, this is a Grove context map. A Grove context map takes a look at the industry, the environment that this organization happens to find itself. It's a good thing to do when you're doing strategic planning, just to say, what are the factors, trends, forces that are pushing on us? And so traditionally with a context map, you've got built into it political factors, the economic climate, customer needs, technological factors, uncertainties, and then notice a couple of blanks. So you would pick those based on whichever organization you're with and their unique industry. You're working with a hospital. What are the healthcare trends, or what are the provider trends or the insurance trends? So you pick, the wild cards are the ones that you pick relative to whatever organization that you happen to be working with. A context map is an example of what I'm about to share with you in more detail. Who here has heard of, I know Karen's heard of it, and Karen, if you want to shout it out by all means, it doesn't mean you're ineligible for saying it. Who has heard of pestle before? Okay, anybody want to give me Pestle? Who can do it? Anyone?
Political.
Shoba. All right, political. Uh-huh.
Economic.
Economic, okay.
Social.
Social.
Technological.
Tech, uh-huh.
Legal.
Legal.
And environmental.
And environmental, okay. Awesome. So this is a way of saying, all right, what are the trends that are facing us right now? Pestle is one of those kind of shorthand mnemonics to say, let's figure out what's happening on in the horizon, okay? One that I got from our friends at MITRE is poet. Oh, that's kind of interesting. What's poet? Political. Okay. Operational. Economic. And technological. Okay. I like that one for a little bit more, government agencies, mission-driven organizations. How do you choose between these and the rest that I'm about to show you? Whichever one you like. This is one of these like pivot points that you can have as a facilitator. STEEP. Anybody know STEEP? Couple folks. All right. So STEEP goes like this. So it's social. This is going to start to echo in a second here. Technological, economic, environmental, and then political. Oh, we had all those before. All right, we did pestle already. Let's do, here's one of my favorites just because it's super geeky, all right? This is a big one. It's called the, it's called the .mlpf. And it comes from the DoD's architecture framework, which itself is an acronym called the DODAF. I know, there's acronyms on top of acronyms, right? So .mlpf, and sometimes there's an extra P. They put on that last P for savings. No. So the first D is to say, this is a really great one if you're doing this inside government, or specifically if you're doing inside the military. Doctrine, okay? I wish I could spell that. Hang on a second. Doctrine. So what is the doctrine around this thing? Organization. Remember, is this thing organizationally supported, right? Do we have the processes, policies, procedures, do we have like the people to be able to do this? Training. Is training in place to be able to do this? Now check this out. Material. That's with an E, not material, material. And so they're talking about stuff there, right? So we're talking about like, do we have the hardware to be able to do this thing? L is leadership and education. I think they're kind of cheating by tacking those two together. To me, that E should be off by itself, but whatever, I didn't invent this thing. Personnel, and that's like, do we actually have the manpower to be able to do this? Facilities. And the funny thing to me is that there is no such thing, there's nothing as permanent in DoD as temporary facilities, okay? If you've ever worked at the Navy Yard, you know exactly what I'm talking about, or the Navy Annex, it's like, I'm not the tallest guy in the room, but the ceilings are this high over my head. And then this last one is policy, okay? Now, this one's kind of a handful, but what's cool about it is that you've really got the DoD's change management model right there, okay? And if you share this if you ever do any DoD work, or anything, loosely related to it, you throw out the .mlpf, people are like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about, okay? Let's do one more. This one comes from grad school. I loosely talked about it before. It goes VRIO. Is this thing valuable? This is a little bit more the criteria-based thing that we're talking about. This would work well with the filters, okay? Is this thing valuable? Does somebody actually want it or need it? Are they willing to pay for it? What are they willing to do to get it? That's if it's valuable. Is it rare? Does it already exist somewhere else? or does this take knowledge and research in order to be able to do? If I can go down to the street to Walmart, it is not rare. Here's a 50-cent word for you. Is it hang on a second, I'm going to spell it wrong first. Inimitable. That is to say, can it be easily duplicated? I mean, if I can come up with Uber, that's great. But if then if somebody else can turn around and put another app out there and call it Lyft, well, that's pretty easy, you know? So if it's easy to duplicate, then it might not be a good line of business to get into. Is there a rare resource? Are you going to tie up a resource that somebody else can't be used? And then finally, we've covered this one before. Is it organizationally supported? Budget, people, KSAs. Do we have the time, culture, strategy, bandwidth to be able to do this thing? Okay. Whew. I got a few more for you, but I don't want to go too hard. Let's see if I've
Brian,
anything else.
I'm curious
Yeah, go for it.
to hear your thoughts on
Let's do one more.
so this whole section, like pestle, because they are framed as yes, no, and my assumption is a lot of times when people are generating solutions, if the idea is new, and the newer an idea is, the more likely the answer is no. Do we have the training for this? No. Do we have the resources? You know what I mean? Because so I would wonder whether in those times when we're looking for original ideas, whether we may not use this or bring up the conversation anyway and let them sort it out.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think as quickly as somebody says, well, we don't have it now, somebody else in the room will probably make the observation, but yeah, how hard would it be for us to actually create that training? You know, is this something that we could feasibly make, buy, rent, whatever, right? Could we get this stuff? And then it becomes about, okay, well, how hard is it to get that? You know, if it's going to be really, really, you know, if somebody's got to go and get a doctorate in order to do this work, then yeah, that's going to be kind of tricky. If, on the other hand, if it's a week-long class, you know, maybe not. And Shobha is the person to go to for that week-long class. All right. That is just about everything. I guess I was kind of going back and forth with this one. Let's do one more. Can you do one more? Got one more in you? All right, we'll do one more. Another refining move that really helps you understand like what's going on, what's in the room, is to do the 5 whys. Okay. Now, I think it's worthwhile to actually, when you're going to do the 5 whys, is to talk about the provenance of the 5 whys, to say where it came from. So I think arguably, you know, there's some debate on this one, but you could point to Tachi Ono at Toyota and the whole Lean Six Sigma movement as to this is where we get the 5 whys. And I think the best way to do this is to demonstrate it. The robot, wait a minute, I got to draw a robot here. The robot has stopped. The robot has stopped, okay? Dead robot. Why did the robot stop? Because the circuit overloaded. Okay, why did the circuit overload? Because the bearings weren't lubricated. Oops, that doesn't have an apostrophe. Bearings weren't lubricated and they locked up. Why did the bearings lock up? Because the oil pump wasn't circulating. Why wasn't the oil pump circulating? Because the intake was clogged. Okay. Why was the intake clogged? Because there was no filter. Okay. Now, here's a couple things. First of all, when this is another one, you teach it, you let people get comfortable with it, and then you get out of the way. But the thing with the 5 whys is that it is linear. And what I mean by that is that it assumes a single series of single causes that cascaded. Now, there may be nonlinear causes, okay? So, for example, there might be a lot of things that are going on. Just to, you know, draw this out, here's our dead robot, and it could be, well, this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and it sort of cascaded together. And so, in a case like that, you could do some root cause analysis. You could do what's called problem tree analysis. By the way, problem tree analysis is from Luma. Okay, I'm not going to go over it here. But if you just Google problem tree analysis and then Luma, you'll go right to their method. Okay, that's a good one for nonlinear causal analysis. Another one is abstraction laddering, also nonlinear, abstraction laddering, and also from Luma. You could also do, and I've kind of drawn one here, but a fishbone diagram, also known as an Ishikawa diagram. Okay, fishbone diagram, Ishikawa diagrams, exactly the same thing. Okay. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be about the robot breaking down. This can be about a lot more interesting things, like what is people's purpose? What is their motivation? What is their drive? You can really begin with anything that you want to know, like, why do you answer email? I've used this in a coaching context when somebody was like, I just find myself answering email all day and I hate it. And we did one of these. I was like, why do I answer email? And it turned out that like answering email is like, that's sort of like the price you pay so that you do the job that you have, right? Anyway, it's just a way of doing some reframing. Those are refiners. Questions, queries, comments, posers, inquiries, percolations, highlights, insights. Anything before I stop the recording? Okay, let me go ahead and hit stop, and thank you very much for being here. Don't go yet, I got more.